HouseByTheVideoStore.com.
Hello there, and welcome to the House by the Video Store review and discussion of Star Wars The Last Jedi. I'm William, and with me today is
Sean.
And we'll start out with no spoilers. We just discuss general thoughts on the movie, kind of recommend, don't recommend, and then we'll move into spoilers and clearly state when we're doing so you know when to get out if you haven't seen the movie. And two, this is just like for some of the newer movies, we're going to be doing just videos that we put on YouTube instead of our full podcast. So if you want to listen to us talk about older horror films or cult films, then make sure to subscribe to the House by Video Store podcast, or if you're on YouTube, you can watch those videos here as well. But yeah, this one we're just going to be discussing Star Wars The Last Jedi, which is a pretty polarizing movie.
Yeah, I mean, actually surprisingly polarizing. Like The Force Awakens was polarizing enough, I think.
Yeah.
But that was like almost, I don't know, I feel like the people that didn't like that were just like, I don't like it, whatever.
Yeah.
Now, like, it's almost like there's more like back and forth with this film.
Yeah, well, with The Force Awakens, it felt like there was essentially two crowds in terms of people who went into it already enjoying some Star Wars films. It was basically, it's too similar, so I don't really care for it, or I bought what they did and I'm into it on the nostalgia ride and the overall feel of the movie, and that even if there are similarities, it's okay.
Yeah, that's where I landed as far as like moment to moment. There was some cool stuff, but sometimes some of the fan service stuff, I feel like they were always winking at the screen. Like, like, hey, here's the Millennium Falcon and here's Han Solo making his entrance. Like, it just felt like it was almost too like winky. And yeah, because it felt like kind of the same story, I really didn't get like I really don't even know what that movie is about, really. You know what I mean? Like, because it feels like it's this treading some of the same water as the first film. Like, Kylo Ren's character, I think, was interesting in that one because it was like, okay, somebody who idolized Darth Vader and is basically wanting to be him, like an adolescent who looks up to this, bad guy. Like, I thought that was a pretty cool take on like a new villain, and it wasn't just a cardboard cutout guy who was already like super threatening, because Kylo wasn't actually that threatening. You know what I mean? He was like an up and comer.
Well, and two, you started with him in the mask and stuff like that. I mean, and two, I think that retroactively, The Force Awakens falls prey to some of the stuff as A New Hope when you watch The Last Jedi, and that a lot of stuff in the first film feels a bit too coincidental or contrived. And that's just because in any of these big franchise movies, so realistically, a major character here would not run into a major character on some distant planet on accident. But at the same time, they don't want the movies to be 17 hours long.
It's in the service of storytelling. Like the old ones were built on archetypes. They were like the classic archetypical characters, and they were telling, the hero's journey. Yeah. And it was just, it was in service of that and kind of an enjoyable ride, I think. And then, The Force Awakens, I was fine with most of the coincidences there. It just, just kind of just didn't do a lot for me. I haven't watched it since. Yeah. I've almost thought about it before, but it just hasn't been like free on a service I've had. Yeah. So I almost did before this, but again, I was like, I don't really want to pay for it. Just because I kind of remember most of the beats of that film. Yeah. So for me going into this one, I don't know, I had like no expectations other than I think Rian Johnson is an excellent filmmaker, and I want to see the film he made with that. That's why I was excited for this one. I thought the Rogue One? Rogue One. Well, that was totally fine, but also kind of forgettable once you walked out of the theaters. Yeah. And Force Awakens was the same way too. Like, I enjoyed moments of that film for sure, but it felt largely forgettable to me. So this one, like, I didn't really have any expectations. I was excited because it was him, and it was the middle chapter of this. Like, I just wanted to see where this stuff was going to go, and like actually how it was going to be handled, like what Disney was going to allow. Because that's a whole nother conversation now. So like while I was waiting for the movie, I heard like another screening going on and like a space battle. And it literally hit me then like, oh wait, this is that movie. Like, I'm going to see some space battles. Like, that's how much I wasn't like, I had like no expectations on scenes for this movie. So I think that's also like, I really enjoyed the movie, but I also wasn't expecting like any certain beats. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't expect Han Solo, like Darth Vader, to come out of the shadows and and Luke Skywalker fighting. You know what I mean? So like, that's where I came in at the movie.
Well, and two, I did not watch any of the actual trailers for the film, and purposely avoided watching those. And in recent months, when I would be in the theater and they would have the trailer, I would close my eyes and cover my ears like an idiot. Because to me, just from what I've read and what I've heard, is that the trailers do a little bit of misdirection and show stuff like a few scenes here and there from later in the movie, but it's so obscure and hard to tell what it is. It doesn't give away story.
I knew you'd done that, and I was thinking about it afterwards, or during the movie or afterwards. I was like, really? I don't feel like the trailer let you know what this film was going to be.
Though, I think that if you do misdirection with the trailer, that's when you really lose audiences and get bad scores. Because the Rotten Tomato audience score is pretty low right now. Now there is some conversation as whether or not that's being gamed by a small minority of people that want to drive controversy. Or
I've seen there's a petition to get this removed from the canon and all that, which is not going to happen anytime soon. But they just dumped all this money into this in time. They're not going to rip this from the canon.
Yeah, I mean, so overall thoughts, the biggest statement I can make coming out of The Last Jedi, without giving any spoilers, is when I came out of The Force Awakens, I'm like, okay, I'm excited to see this again. It kind of washed the taste of the prequels out of my mouth. And I was like, okay, I'm excited to see how these new characters interact with the remaining characters and to see where this goes. And then after The Last Jedi, I'm like, I don't really know where this story's going to go, and I'm not sure how much I care now.
Yeah. I almost so after The Force Awakens, I was like, okay, I'm excited to see, I'm on board. I will see where this goes, But I also came out of that film thinking, well, maybe Star Wars just isn't for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just not something I like. Watching this film shortly into it, I was like, oh crap, this is a Star Wars I really like. This is kind of whatever it did for me. This realigned my love for Star Wars. I don't have any Star Wars shirts. I would get a Last Jedi shirt now, specifically Last Jedi though. But I boxed up my Star Wars movies years ago, and I was kind of finished watching them. I don't know, just something happened, and I got oversaturated with just everything Star Wars. And I still play some of the games and stuff. I still like it, but I kind of just got tired of watching those movies. So for this kind of re-energized me, and it made me really excited to see his trilogy he's doing or whatever. That's, I guess, totally disconnected from all that stuff.
Watching this though almost made me wish that he was just doing his trilogy, and not these mainline stories.
Yeah.
Because hold some of that stuff for spoilers, just because it's really hard to discuss too much. Overall, the filmmaking on it, I thought was superb in terms of, it didn't feel like there weren't wipes, and there weren't
stylistically, you're talking, right? Because J.J. Abrams, the one thing that kind of bothered me was some of the digital zooms, in the space chases and stuff, that just felt handy-camish, which that was a small complaint. They didn't ruin the movie for me, but I like the way he handled this, even though Force Awakens had some beautiful shots, and there was some awesome looking stuff in that film. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's just the filmmaking aspects of it I thought were good. And when you if you were to have if there was a younger kid that hadn't seen any of these films, and you started with episode 1 on up to the current one, that's a huge tonal whiplash.
Oh yeah.
You had the original series that felt one way, the prequels that felt completely different, and then these new films that don't feel like the prequels, and they don't they evoke some of the feelings of the originals. But the biggest thing to me that was the difference in two of the original series, to me, it's Empire Strikes Back is kind of on a different level from the other two films. Because Empire to me felt like there was exploration to it, and that there was this big wide universe. And then The Last Jedi didn't really make me feel that way.
No, and one of my complaints from The Force Awakens was that we kind of globe-trotted or planet-trotted, but all of the planets kind of felt like the ones we've seen before. And that's what I liked about the prequels. It showed you new stuff. This, minor spoilers, this did not satisfy that need, but because I wanted that from The Force Awakens, because I felt like it was retelling a lot of the same story.
Yeah.
So that's why I was at least I wanted something new. It felt like all of it was really the same. This, I think, at least the story went certain places where I was kind of fine on it being a little constrictive in some elements. Having said that, yeah, I think at some points I was like, okay, I'm kind of ready for them to move past this point. You know, there was a moment when I was like, okay, I'm ready for them to get out of this situation because I want to see some characters in a new environment or a new place as far as the story's going, because I feel like we're spinning our wheels a little bit here.
Well, and two, like, it felt like, without spoiling it, there was like a side quest where the characters just abandon it at one point and luck into a resolution.
Yeah, which, yes, that's kind of, it was a kind of I don't want to say how that goes, but I think there's thematic reasons for that. And we can kind of go on that. And to piggyback off that, I think this is like the most thematic heavy Star Wars film ever. And I think that's why I liked it. Like, I felt like every scene had a purpose to kind of build on some sort of message. Yeah. And I think that was missing from The Force Awakens. And the original ones, they had their message, but they were basic heroes' journeys told. Yeah. They were basic adventures. This, you know, whether or not you want that from a Star Wars film, I think that's why I love this so much. And again, that's why I liked War for the Planet of the Apes. It was another like big sci-fi film that was great to look at, and kind of the technology used just for the apes and everything was impressive. But on top of that, there was like really good storytelling and some really good exploration of different themes and stuff. And I feel like that's what this did for me as well. And it did, you know, Star Wars is like, it is not what it was when it was first released. You know, it means something else now because there's been, everybody knows those big scenes. My wife, one of them was on TV the other day, and I did turn on like Empire or something, and she was like, I may have liked these movies more if I didn't know everything that happens in them. She knew everything that happened in them before she even saw them. You know what I mean? Like, there's just such a saturation of Star Wars that watching them now, and even the new films, are a different experience. And I feel like this put such a spin on it that I could see why it would turn off some people. But for me, it's like, okay, now it feels fresh again, and it opened things up in a different way that makes it feel exciting, and you don't know where it's going next. And that's what I liked about it.
Yeah, I think just my biggest complaint, and not necessarily like a fault of the movie, it's just like the original movies, regardless of like, you know, the original trilogy, regardless of how good the films were, they all evoked like a very specific feeling and mood. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like Force Awakens just was more of kind of jump started. And it's like, oh, here's Han Solo and here's the Millennium Falcon again. And then it's kind of like you haven't seen these characters in 30 years. So there's that, you know, rush of adrenaline when you see them for the first time. But then once you've seen them, then you're like, okay, so what next? Like, where's this actually going? And
JJ's, you know, reliance on the mystery box stuff.
Yeah.
Setting up all those mysteries, which, again, I really liked how that was handled in this, because that's sometimes a bunch of bullshit, because sometimes no matter the answer you get, it can't be as interesting as the mystery itself. You know what I mean? Because
like
if it turns out the way you expected, then it's not really a surprise. You know, and sometimes it turns out differently, and it may seem contrived if it's some other thing where, you know, we find out there's all those theories about who Snoke was, you know, being reincarnated or cloned and all this stuff. Yeah. So all that stuff would have just felt very gimmicky, and again, made the universe feel a little bit closed off.
And two, like, I'm not somebody that is adverse to getting something different than what you expect, because Twin Peaks: The Return, season 3, like, I loved, one of my favorite things of the year, and that definitely wasn't.
That was a more drastic change than this movie is to the other Star Wars films.
And I just felt like a lot of elements in Twin Peaks, like, you got peaks of what you loved about the original while getting something new. And to me, this one never really got any peaks of what I loved, because even, like, we'll save it for spoilers, there's even some things that happen that should elicit like a huge feeling that then don't really. Yeah. But like, just kind of guess wrapping up before we move into the spoilers, because it's really hard not to
we can just
discuss it.
Final thoughts on this.
Final thoughts, like, if you most people probably have already seen it who are really into the franchise, because it made like over 200 million. So it made more in its opening weekend than I think Justice League had to that point so far.
Wow.
But it, you know, huge success, make a ton of money.
I need to put Jedis in Justice League next time.
But, you know, so if you like Star Wars, you have to see it. I would just say, like, if somebody was really into The Force Awakens, really being kind of like a remix of the series mythology and kind of getting it back to like a platform for new stories to take off from, this, in ways you don't expect, veers from what's expected. And yeah, I mean, like, without spoiling, like, I was okay with taking twists and changing from what was expected. It's just the gut level feeling wasn't there for
Yeah.
me. So that was what was missing.
I mean, really, too, no matter, again, like I said, this is very thematic heavy, and a lot of those things I loved kind of picking up on watching the film and thinking, okay, this is really smart, this is satisfying me. But at the same time, even if you retroactively kind of look at it and break it down, if it just doesn't do it for you on an emotional level, like, you know what I mean? It just doesn't do it. Like, that's just, it's whatever reaction. And as I walked out of the theater, I was thinking, okay, I was trying to think where this sits for me, but it's really hard to do that just because, again, those old movies were in such a different time and place. You saw them at different times and places of your life. You know what I mean? Like, this is built off the backbones of those and many other things, and was changed to the things that happened in Force Awakens, good or bad.
Yeah.
But, so it's really a weird thing to kind of rank them almost. But as far as me being, again, this is me being excited for Star Wars again, and I didn't think I could be excited for it in this way again. Yeah. So, and I don't think it's a perfect film. Like, probably wouldn't give this a 10 out of 10, but I've only seen it once. I may find more flaws into it, or I may fall in love with it even more. But having said that, I think a film with the great ideas, it's easy to overlook some flaws in it. And that's what I did with this. Even watching it, I was kind of like, okay, even if some things maybe didn't hit me as they should, or moments, and I was like, okay, let's move things along. Like, I think what they were selling, I was buying so much. It's like, when you are in on something, you kind of forgive some small things. That's how it was. But I recognize there's some small things there for sure. Just even for me. But I absolutely loved it and didn't even expect to like it this much. So I'm like super excited to see his trilogy and to see the place he has put J.J. Abrams. Seems like he's going to push him out of his comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see what he's going to do. And hopefully he's inspired him to take some certain risk.
Yeah.
Because that first film was not risky at all, Force Awakens. That was about as safe as you could play it.
The risk in the film was making it to begin with.
Yeah.
Just recognizing what the prequel's reputation was at that point in time, and how many people felt about anything that happened post 1983. And making it like his task was to get it back on a path where people were excited about it again and bring original characters back. But that being said, it didn't like break any new ground. It introduced new characters and some new elements, but it didn't really introduce much. I guess we can move into spoilers. So if you haven't seen The Last Jedi, you want to check out, because we're going to do full spoilers from this point forward. And
you can only see it once, so don't let this crappy video review ruin it for you.
Go unless you just hate Star Wars. But so full spoilers now. So the overall themes about you don't have to be a Skywalker or a Solo to have a part in it, and anybody can and help. To me, it felt like it was also ground that was covered in Rogue One. Where it wasn't Star Wars, it wasn't Jedis and Skywalkers and Solos. It was just other characters that were involved. So, and then like in the movie, like revealing that Rey's parents were just nobodies.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine with me.
Yeah.
That to me, that's much more satisfying than like a lost love child of Luke or something like that,
or Obi-Wan's granddaughter or something. Like for me too, I think it is very indicative of the time we're living in. Like back then, I think people idolized, there were different types of idols back then. And now it is very much kind of the 99%ers, the everyman. I think now it's a different time and place, and I think it's very much indicative of kind of the downtrodden people. And granted, Luke was just like a nobody from a farm or whatever, and that's what that was about. But he was almost like a chosen one, so to say. He was
destined.
He was supposed to bring balance to the Force.
But then again, like I know, like Lucas had said that he had like an original like 9-part story. I don't think he did. Yeah. Or I think he changed it drastically because I really don't think rewatching A New Hope because like one, you put Luke on a planet that his father is from, and he keeps the name of Skywalker.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a conducive strategy to hiding someone. Unless the thought was that that Vader hated that planet so much he would never return.
He said he hates sand, William.
You know
sand.
That. But
where will he not go? Where's the most sand?
But then like other themes I think are more interesting that I'm not really sure how much will be explored in the future is, the fact that you have Jedis and Siths and the Jedis wielded all this power and got undone by their hubris and overlooked.
Yeah, they just screw up left and right, really.
So I think that tearing down those power structures and saying, okay, the Jedi and the Sith, they both need to end. People can use the Force, but you don't have to be adhering to some like binary decision of you're white or you're black or you're green
or a certain order of these rules you have to follow. Basically like the Jedi religion.
Because
yeah, I'm like way into that because it also like gives new life to the series, I think.
But then ultimately, I think if that was the decision, or that that's the ultimate goal, is like, well, there doesn't have to be Sith or Jedi. There are going to be people who use the Force for whatever purposes they need, and it doesn't require you to be 100% good or bad. You can just be a range of different things. You can be gray instead of being white or black. You're gray, and you kind of do things here and there, which is kind of more how Luke was in the original trilogy, because he wasn't the super pious, stupid, rat-tailed Jedi Padawan.
Yeah.
But, so that stuff I'm into. It just feels like, to me, what they did with Luke's character, I know, when Mark Hamill originally got the script, he was very unhappy with the decisions and argued on it. And I do think that just I personally have a hard time seeing Luke go from the character you saw in the original trilogy to the character you saw in this trilogy. And it just feels like whenever you watch the sequel years later, the hero always starts off downtrodden and worse off than they were the last time you saw them. And to me, what they've essentially done is circled back to Empire versus Rebels, with the Empire having the upper hand. And I would have much rather seen a different story where maybe it was still, Leia and Luke who were in power, and then that lesson was taught to them, to the lesson being taught. I mean, I know this is about a trilogy about new characters, but it feels like they just kind of have pushed the old characters out and are replicating the overall story arc from the originals of Rebels versus Empire, when they could have done something different.
I think, those are the backbones of that. And also, too, I thought that was a little boring, too, in Force Awakens, when it was kind of cool, but then you have Kylo Ren, and so much was replicated.
Yeah.
But I think this film really does a lot to push those boundaries as far as breaking those things down, because, again, so personally, I love the way Luke was handled. In my mind, it all makes sense. Granted, I haven't watched those films in a long time.
Yeah.
I honestly don't have a great idea of what all Luke stood for, other than him going on his adventures and, basically having missions in the old films.
Yeah.
So, it has been a long time. Stuff has happened, major things have happened in his life. He's made mistakes, with Kylo Ren and stuff. But I think he's more entertaining than he ever was in those original trilogies, and Mark Hamill's performance was stellar in it as well. I think his performance was far and beyond, and I think that in part is because of the writing. I just feel like there was just more character there for me, and even the opening moments, as you would expect, Luke from the original trilogy, you think he would hand him the lightsaber and he would kind of look at it wistfully and turn it on. And I feel like that's how fans would look at that scene and the lightsaber.
Yeah.
So for me, I love that he just threw it over his shoulder. I loved that moment.
If you watch the two movies back to back, I think it's tonal whiplash.
Yeah.
Because The Force Awakens ended very much on a more somber, mysterious aspect. And then to have it cut immediately to kind of more slapstick humor.
Yeah. Well,
I think is a jarring.
So, it opens on the space battle, as they always do.
And then the your mom joke.
So, again, as soon as the film started, General Hux, right, is his name, he started talking. And I was, at first, I was like, oh God, is this just a typical Star Wars? Because he was being annoyingly smug and British, and I was just like, oh God, I was like, maybe I just don't like Star Wars. But then they immediately go back on that, and that was the point of his character being so egregious, I think, you know what I mean, and almost just stereotypically boring, because those characters were in the original trilogy, and then they were in The Force Awakens. You know what I mean? His character was this stuffy British villain that wears this kind of goofy outfit, So I feel like they immediately start subverting that. And that kind of clued me on where this film was going.
Well, instead of being a Grand Moff Tarkin, from the original series, he's more of Like the thing that's interesting to me though, with the place that they left this movie with Snoke being dead and Luke being dead, and it's essentially like Rey versus Kylo Ren, and then the remnants of the rebels, like the the conflict for the next movie, like if Hux is supposed to be a major part of it, he's a joke now. He can never really be taken seriously.
Well, I mean, I don't think, and I think he is kind of a goofy. I thought he was a goofy character in the other one. I just thought they took him seriously, you know? So for me, he is a throwaway character. And I think now, like, I think Snoke dying was
well, that was something I was on board with because
a great decision, because I didn't want just a repeat of, you know, the same events of Empire.
So, yeah, I mean, and two, like, having that happen the way it did, and it being because Kylo Ren's like, oh, he's dead, no, I'm in control.
Yes.
And it not being self-sacrificing for someone else, like that, I was
Which is kind of what you expected he was doing almost. You thought he was turning. Like, I thought that whole sequence was amazing. Like, I loved them battling and fighting together was like a fan service-y fun moment that was like, oh, this is just awesome, like Star Wars action scene that is just fun. And then, it kind of turns your expectations again. And it's like, oh no, it's because he kind of punked me out so many times and he thought he knew what was right. Like, I'm basically taking over. And so after the beginning, after the Hux scene also too, which they kind of already throw a wrench in his character, which again, I was not on board with really in the original, in Force Awakens. I just thought, those types of characters in these films are so cliche almost. Like, I know people have compared some of this humor to Spaceballs, but at this point, some of Star Wars is Spaceballs because it is so far removed from when it was made.
What's funny though is, to me at this point, so a lot of people, like J.J. Abrams, when he did the reboot of Star Trek, everybody said, oh, he made Star Trek into Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And then this one to me feels a lot more like those Star Trek movies than A Force Awakens did, despite being directed by Rian Johnson. Because you have more of like the humor around, because the original movies did have humor, but it was relatively sparse and much drier.
Yeah, this is almost poking fun of itself, and for me,
it's taking the piss out of itself.
And for me, that it had to happen because I can't take these films too seriously, just because they are such a huge thing. Like, and it is outside factors. It's not the films themselves. It is the fact that there is 1,000 commercials for Star Wars stuff on TV. You know what I mean? Like, there's, from the opening moments too, like Kylo Ren's helmet in the original, you're like, okay, he's just got a Darth Vader type thing. And it was cool. They pointed out he was trying to mimic him, but I love that he destroyed it in the beginning of this because it is like a dumb thing that of course your character's going to have that
Vader
helmet.
Wore a helmet for
practical reasons,
and Kylo Ren was wearing one just to replicate that.
Yes, like I love that was just destroyed. Like the three things that set me off on this film was, one, taking the piss out of General Hux because I think he was kind of dumb anyway. Kylo smashing his helmet again. I think that was a little unnecessary. Like it was necessary in the story in the original, but you kind of got to the point of that character now, why he wears it. Like that's kind of done. And then you have Luke throwing the lightsaber, and I was way on board at that point because this is kind of, it was somebody looking at it and examining Star Wars and kind of realizing some of the elements in here that are almost only there just because of tradition or because of expectations, and it almost strips away those things that I think are a little goofy if you stand back and look at them.
Yeah, well, so overall, my big problems with the movie, aside from how Luke was handled, I could get that iteration of the character, but at the same time, so in the movie, Laura Dern's character, was it Holdo? Mm-hmm. Well, so first off, when the ship gets blown up and Leia's out in space and somehow survives the vacuum of space and uses the Force to pull herself back to the ship, that moment lost a lot of people because we never really saw anything like that in the original trilogy, and it almost feels like a prequel thing.
One thing it didn't really bother me because
her using the Force is fine. That's fine.
Yeah, again, because of the way this film started out, it clued me off that Rian Johnson was very much at being introspective on Star Wars, what Star Wars is, and kind of some of the things about it. And kind of setting up some thematic things. Like even that first scene is, about self-sacrifice, but then later, they talk about that was a stupid move. They really didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like Poe made a bad decision and he like basically disregarded everybody's orders.
Yeah.
So like the Leia thing, I almost took that as like after seeing the entire film that her character, you have Kylo and Luke who use the Force and use it mainly for a lot of times for combat, to solve problems, and they are using that in a combative way, and it's almost like she is passive in that way with her use of it. Like she uses her mind more to win battles and is very smart instead of again hopping in an X-wing and blowing stuff up as she tells Poe. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that was showing her character like, hey, remember she is Force sensitive, she has Force powers, but she tackles problems in a different way, and she'll use it in this way rather than using it to Force choke somebody or something.
It's just there were different.
And Force lightning wasn't in any other films until the Emperor used it. Like what, in the last film or something? You know what I mean? Like
he used it in Return of the Jedi.
There are new things. Like I think it's good to bring in new things too, because again, if you're just seeing people Force choke and lightsaber people to death. Well, I don't know. It's a cool way to expand it.
It feels like in the original trilogy that Jedi were just relatively good warriors. They used a lightsaber and could do some things like jump a little bit higher and move stuff around.
And telekinesis.
And, control or influence the weak-minded. So it felt like they had a very, useful skill set, but not like an overwhelming destructive power. Mm-hmm. And then as the movies have went along, it fluctuates. The movies, the cartoons, the games,
the books,
the comics. It just feels like the powers.
You play those Jedi games, and it's like dark side, light side, and here's 20 different powers on each side.
Because what was it, the Force Unleashed, which at one point I believe was canon before it all got wiped out when Disney bought it. The character in that was able to pull down a Star Destroyer,
TIE fighter,
from space. So there's like a huge variance in what those powers are portrayed as, but
it is all how I've saw people complaining about Rey being able to fight those red guards, and maybe I don't know the logistics of all the Star Wars characters, but for me it's two ways to look at this, and even some of the storytelling, like you mentioned like Laura Dern's character, if she just would have told Poe that she has a plan, maybe he would have stood down and it would have disregarded a lot of that stuff. And I totally personally, I think she thought, oh, he's a screw up. He just got demoted. I need to teach him a lesson to like just trust people who've been put into power for a certain reason. Obviously there's a reason why she's been promoted and he has been demoted. But having said that, even if some things don't gel quite right, I think thematically some of these things in this film are so strong that I'm willing to give a little bit, even if the Force stuff is like, okay, that's a little weird, but I kind of get it. That maybe they were showing how she tackles her problems.
Well, too, though, part of the communication error. So, like, if Laura Dern's character was at Holdo, had told Poe, like, when he's like, "What's your plan?" and she's like, "Look, here's the plan. They will track us until we run out of fuel. But when we get close to this planet, they can't actually track the small transport, so we can evacuate everyone safely and out of sight to this planet and wait for them to continue passing or following the ship until it runs out of gas past then." Then even like, oh, and they wouldn't have had the side quest to the casino planet or anything with Finn. And I know a lot of times that's story convenience and, real life people doing stuff. It just gives me flashbacks of The Walking Dead where entire seasons characters didn't relay specific information that they set it up front the entire season. And two, like I said before, it almost ends up being the same story as the Road Warrior. Like, people have this ship that they're just, or like on the Road Warrior, it's like the tanker, and they're just going until they, being chased, and then it's a big misdirect. You could argue like Empire Strikes Back is just about them trying to escape the Empire and Luke trying to get trained, but like...
Yeah, and the moment that I talked about earlier, like I was kind of ready for them to get out of that situation. Like when Poe was like kept asking and all that stuff, I was kind of like, okay, I'm ready for this story. Like we have Rey's story going on, and I think it's fascinating, and I love the Kylo. I love the relationship building there. Like I thought that was very good as far as building a relationship between these two characters and not keeping them apart until they get together to lightsaber fight, and that's it. Because that's what this could have been in this film and the final one.
And too, like so you have to like Rey getting trained by Luke. She essentially learned even less than Luke learned from Yoda and Empire. He basically like touched her hand with a leaf and told her like to meditate and helped explain what the Force was.
Yeah.
And that was about all that she learned.
And two, you know, of course, a bunch was cut for this film, and it's not in the film for a reason, and we were only presented with what we have. I was actually a little muddy on how much training she got. I heard some people say, oh, she was only there 2 or 3 days. I was a little foggy myself because I don't think it was as clear in the film, which I think is a fault of it.
Well, and you're intercutting their entire time together, knowing that transport ship had like 8 hours of fuel left.
But I didn't know if it was like actually intercut or if this was interspersed, like, you know, a larger amount of time.
Because like on Empire Strikes Back, it's plausible that, you know, Han and Leia and Chewie were hiding out for days in different locations when they were moving around.
Yeah.
And Luke was with, you know, Yoda for, you know, more than just a couple of days, like maybe a week or you know, weeks or whatever. But in this movie, the timeline felt like she was there for like a day or two and then left.
And the only thing I can say about that too, that maybe is another just kind of line they threw in there, I don't know, but basically when, what is his name? The essentially Emperor now.
Oh,
Snoke, he says something like, you know, when Kylo Ren's power rose, hers did as well.
Yeah.
You know, and she was already good at combat with her stick or whatever. That's the only thing I can say that kind of would maybe gel a little bit of that. But also, too, she gets in the room with Snoke, and again, that great scene, she tries to pull the lightsaber, and it flies around and hits her in the head. Like, again, I love those little moments where you think you know how it's going to go, and it totally just flips you on the head. And a lot of times it makes logical sense. Like,
well, too, though, like a lot of it, though, seems like it's inventions as it goes along in all of these movies.
Yeah.
Because, like, if if one person got stronger, if the Sith got stronger, the Jedi got stronger, then theoretically Luke would have been equally powered to face Vader.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's also just
there was a moment that he said that, though, specifically that they rose together, like as he got more powerful, she did, which is a weird, like, why are they linked? You know what I mean?
Too, based on the fact that she comes from kind of nobody. She's just one of many people that is Force sensitive, and just like so. And two, I think part of the big difference just in the original trilogy, the fight choreography and special effects weren't as advanced as they are today.
Yeah.
So they can do a lot more. I mean, if they could have done that back in the late 70s and 80s, I'm sure that the fight scene between Obi-Wan and Vader would have been a little bit more exciting. But I mean, so to me, like, there's like narrative things like the lack of communication between characters. Then there's, you know, the side quest at the casino.
So that side quest, I think, again, that reinforces one, like the theme of Poe and his failures. Like, you know, he starts out, he doesn't listen to Leia. He causes people to get killed for really no good reason in that opening scene, you know?
Yeah.
And then again, he does it again. Their mission fails anyway, and he is also responsible. And I've seen some people point out, I didn't notice this, but essentially a lot of this is about the the masculine toxicity.
Or toxic masculinity.
Yeah, and basically how, you know, Poe is being put in his place by women throughout this film.
But the thing is, though, like, so basically the rebels lose most of their people because the mission that Finn was sent on fails, and the Benicio del Toro character rats them out and gives all information to the Empire. So if it wasn't for that, then their plan would have worked.
Yeah.
But the thing is, Poe doesn't, like, aside from the knowledge of what he did, or the mission that he, you know, pushed out caused all that, doesn't really have anything negative happening to him. Like, what if the next scene in the next movie is him being executed for treason?
Well, and again, the women in this, Lauren Dern and Leia, instead of executing him or punishing him, they kind of let him learn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They kind of, they had a mutiny, they took him out, but then they kind of like, hey, we understand you're doing it for good reasons.
Yeah.
But hey, dumbass, just set this one out, you know? And by the end, I think he does kind of learn, you know, because he tells, Finn to pull back when Finn is going to also try to be the hero essentially. You know, it is much like Han Solo always just trying to be the hero. Things don't quite work out, but then they kind of do in the end by a different way, you know. And this film is all about people doing that and failing.
Well, I mean, and two though, like in like Empire, Luke was impulsive and tried to go and take on Vader, and then he lost the fight and got his hand cut off,
which is way more interesting than just a hero succeeding.
And then, but then, like in this movie, it feels like Poe failing just gets other people killed, not him. It gets Admiral Akbar killed off screen,
which is actually worse. You know what I mean? Which is,
I just don't know if like if the narrative heft is going to follow through on that.
I mean, I think again, I don't know about it narrative, but thematically, I think it does. You know what I mean? I think thematically it does, and JJ can do whatever he wants with that, and he can continue to run with that, or he can throw that away and just have Finn and Poe be buddy and trot along and, you know, help save the galaxy. I don't know what he wants to do with those stories, but the casino also too. Yeah, you kind of feel like, okay, well, that was almost all for nothing, but you know, one, Poe screwed up again. It was there for thematic reasons on that, and two, the children there, you know, they kind of got to see people fighting
for the rebels,
you know, essentially fighting against things that are wrong. And in this case, again, I think it's a sign of the times. Those are essentially the 1%ers. Like they talk about it being what is her name? The female character's name?
Rose.
Rose. You know, she says, "Oh, I heard it. You know, this is full of some of the scummiest people in the galaxy."
Yeah.
And you think it's going to be like the cantina, but it's essentially what a lot of people think scummy people are now, which is the 1%ers that are
war profiteers and peddlers of weapons of destruction.
Yeah, and we come back to them at the end and see the kid that is like Force sensitive. So for me too, I know some people have said, "Oh, we're kind of just in the same place we're at." Some people are dead, but the resistance is smaller. For me, I think it has changed. You know, it has kind of been the destruction of the Jedi, possibly. She obviously has those books at the end. So she may continue some training, but it seems like that order may be gone. The Sith may be kind of changed. I don't know what Kylo Ren's going to do with the new order, but it's almost setting up to where it's not going to be as simple as these resistance fighters and the new order. It's almost seems like it is, again, something very appropriate with our times, is
sparking the people to
exactly where it's the everyman, and that's kind of how you could win that battle, where it could be them blowing up a Death Star, you know what I mean, or killing Kylo Ren with the lightsaber, but really to win it is win over the people's hearts. And then I mean, you could see some great scenes of people basically uprising on all these different planets, you know what I mean, like that's how you win that battle, is basically winning people over, giving them hope, and kind of sending out the right message. So hopefully it ends up on a more interesting note than just the resistance versus the new order, you know, in that last film. And I feel like that's the direction they were going for, that they were setting up. And that, you know, it's not just people with lightsabers, you know, it's not an elite group of people that are allowed to use it. It's anybody who has anything special inside them that wants to use that power for good. And as they said to Rey, like, you know, they talked about the temple burning down when Yoda's talking to Luke, which I loved all that scene too. You know, Yoda says like, "Hey, those are old texts or whatever." She already knows all she needs to know. And basically I took that as like, if you're a good person and you have something good in your heart, that's all you need to know to succeed. You know?
Also, I think literally that she had the books.
Yeah, I mean that could have been it too, but I think there's a lot of double meaning in this film as well. I think,
it's just
and Benicio del Toro's character too talks about war profiteers, and he's like, they blow you guys up, you blow them up. I almost feel like that was like him commenting on Star Wars films.
Well,
you know what I mean?
So one thing that I have to come to with his character is him having like the speech impediment or the vocal tick. Like, I'm not sure what the character choice was. That drew attention to itself and just seemed to be like a quirky thing without really...
I mean, that's what he did in Usual Suspects too, right?
Yeah.
That was probably just his thing. Which I didn't really notice it was that much of a vocal tick. What was it?
It was like a stutter that he did. And, I mean...
And you thought his character might have some redemption, even when he gives him the necklace back. And I kind of like that he didn't, and he was just a shitty person and doesn't come back to help like Han or anything.
Yeah, he just takes the money and, well, he probably, you don't know if he died or not.
Yeah.
Well, there's other stuff that's like convenient, like when, another thing that this movie brought to light is that if you can take a ship and put it into light speed in the middle of another ship and destroy it, why aren't they sending like small one-man fighters into the middle of Star Destroyers and big ships all the time?
I mean, she had a pretty big ship to send in the middle of that, though, right?
So then why would you make a bunch of those ships that were piloted by one person and send them into the Death Star?
The Resistance couldn't do it because I think they're limited on supplies. You know what I mean? Like, when they go to that base, too, some stuff's like the shittiest it has ever been for them to fly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I think that they had a bunch of stuff that they introduced. It's like, well, why didn't you think to do that before?
Yeah, I mean, you could think about it that way as far as like, oh, well, this doesn't really line up. But I almost think it doesn't really ruin the old films for me. I would rather them introduce some slightly new things that you could maybe say like, hey, why didn't, with Leia floating in the air and Luke doing like force projections and all that stuff. But for me, it is all like some slight stuff that I think is better to show you something new than just play around in these same restrictive set of rules that have been in place since, the 70s or 80s. Because again, The Force Awakens was a little boring for me in that regard, that it really didn't show you much else new. It played it too safe and it didn't take enough risks for me.
Yeah, I mean, with this movie, it's just, I'm not sure where they go next. Like, I don't know, just like the overall, like when Luke did the force projection, then it caused him to turn into a force ghost. I mean, like, I get narratively what's going on there, and if you have him too involved in the next movie, then it's essentially still his trilogy and not the new characters. But at the same time, it's like he could have lived, like...
I mean, he said he wanted to die on that island, and that's what he did. He said, I'm dying on this island. And I think
But Yoda told him that he needed to not lose Rey like he did Kylo Ren.
Which I think he did. Like, he kind of inspired... Again, he inspired hope, even in the kid at the end that, was holding up the broomstick like a lightsaber after telling the story. And he like did multiple things. He kind of faced his past, and that like he confronted his demons almost, and he helped the Resistance escape. And then he also helped inspire hope throughout the galaxy. You know what I mean? Like, I think there was multiple things going on there. I know some people were also they were like, oh, if you look at the clues, you can see he was force projecting. I kind of picked up on that right away just because he looked differently.
When you saw him show up, there was the element that his hair was cut.
Yeah, he looked like he did a flashback. Like,
his beard was darker and shorter.
Yeah.
So it's like, did he cut his hair and trim his beard and dye it on the way there? No. And during their fight, his lightsaber never touched Kylo Ren's. It didn't touch anything else, and it was blue.
Yeah. Again,
Rey had the blue lightsaber with her, and his was green.
Again, too, it's maybe him learning, like, hey, which is another message that was a little cheesy in the film when Rose says to Finn, like, you don't win, through hate or whatever. You win through love. That was cheesy, but that's almost like what Luke did at that point, too. And again, what Leia was doing with the Force. It wasn't like, as Luke said, taking his laser sword and, killing somebody
on
with
the
it.
Entire
which is kind of ridiculous that for somehow that works if you just kill the Emperor, and if you cut off the head of the snake, the rest of it dies, like in the original trilogy. It's a little ridiculous.
Well, I mean, I think that in the original trilogy, the idea was they blew up like their major weapon and their leader, so left them scrambling, then unable to get power back until the recent trilogy.
And it worked for that story, I think, and that archetypical characters and the story they were telling. I think now you kind of have to grow up with the story they're telling, and you can't just, go down that path of a simple MacGuffin or a one goal object to win the day.
Well, I think the thing that to me was the biggest disconnect, and probably the biggest issue I have, is you're like the character of Luke. So in the original trilogy, him continually thinking, in the Return of the Jedi, that his father could be turned back to the light side because there was goodness in him, and all he had to do was reach him. And the fact that he went to the ends of the earth to save his friend Han, and in the second movie in Empire, he risked himself to try to save to save Leia and Han and Chewie. So somebody who constantly puts their friends above themselves, and somebody who saw his belief that the goodness in people win out work, so then sees it work and is proven right and wins, would then 15 years later just give up easily.
What do you mean, like as far as almost striking down Kylo?
Yeah, well, and then after all the fall of that going into exile, it seems like the character, unless there's a bunch of other stuff that wasn't covered, Like, it just seems like a big jump for his character to make. So, like, based on what they showed you in this movie, his character makes perfect sense and was a great performance. I just don't see how they got his character to where it was in those flashbacks from where you saw that character previously.
Yeah.
It just seemed like they made a big shift.
I mean, he did say it was just a single moment of weakness. You know what I mean? It was almost like fear in his heart. He almost saw that coming and knowing what all that pain that caused.
Yeah.
And maybe it was a fear of things spinning out of the control for him. And, you know, instead of doing the right thing, he did have one single moment. And it was a moment of weakness, which Luke always had those. You know what I mean? He always went back and forth.
Well, it just seems to me like after that, he would then, you know, try to fix it or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
it didn't seem like he would just give up like he did.
I mean, he's a flawed character, you know. And again, it's thematic reasons, and you know, it is basically people are always going to debate on what they think is right and wrong because, you know, it is a long-standing franchise. You know, it's not I mean, even George Lucas did that. I know some people may question it on some level too, but you know, it was a decision made, and people may like it or not. And it is all subjective whether you're in on it or not. I think somebody pointed out too, this is the first Star Wars film written and directed by a single person since George Lucas worked on them. Well, but I know like Carrie Fisher did some script work on it and stuff too. She helped out. But
and something else too so the part where Finn was about to sacrifice himself and drive his skiff or whatever it was called into that door ram, and Rose like crashed his ship to save him. To me, it's like, oh, this is a big subversion of expectations. One of your main characters, they're typically covered in very heavy plot armor and can't be killed until the final movie or not at all. Oh, he's actually gonna sacrifice himself. And I was like, in my head, it's like, oh man, like he's a really good character, but this is, you know, not what I was expecting. I was actually kind of excited about the prospect. And then they saved him at the last second.
Well, and I think that was more important for thematic reasons, because otherwise it would just be a one moment character death. And one, Rose's story I think was told really well.
But two, how does she not know that what she did wouldn't just kill them both in a fire crash?
I mean, she doesn't know that. But I love the setup of Rose's character. You know, at first her sister, I was like, are we supposed to know who the necklace belongs to?
It was just a show later.
Yeah. So once we caught up with her, again, I love that her character was just somebody that worked behind the pipes.
Yeah.
Again, the everyman. You know what I mean? Like this is the person. This is the way the resistance is going to winning the hearts of the everyman. And so her story is very much kind of about that and not sacrificing yourself needlessly for something heroic that may not help out in the end. And that kind of comes to a head with Poe's hopefully realization that, hey, don't be a stupid person and go for heroics. Think you're going to save the day. Like he kept telling Finn, no, abandon it. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So it was kind of thematically Poe's, I guess, end of his journey on learning that lesson throughout the film. And then Rose kind of almost telling the audience too, like it's love, not violence, and again, jumping in your spaceship, blowing stuff up, cutting people down with a lightsaber, you know what I mean? Or being like a kamikaze.
If Finn had actually finished that though and not been stopped and blown up their battering ram and it didn't get to blow the door open, wouldn't that have meant that Luke wouldn't have needed to use the force projection to the extent he did that caused him to die? And they would have still been able to escape because they could figure out that there was a back entrance. Do
we know that he did the force projection killed him though? I almost felt that like when Yoda like fades away.
Yeah.
And even Obi-Wan, I feel like they felt like their place in the story is finished and their purpose is done. And I almost felt like the reason he faded away is because he was at peace with himself finally, and he could die. He could let go. He kind of did what he did all he could do and basically did the most almost inspiring thing. And you know, he could come with his lightsaber and do whatever else in the other ones. But I felt like the story they told with him was very complete for me personally.
Well, I mean, too, because, you know, he talked about like the legend that, you know, of him and how he was so revered and stuff. And then he literally would have a story circulating about he faced down all kinds of AT-ATs and explosions and battled Kylo Ren. Because people probably won't say, oh, it was a force projection. Like, Luke Skywalker came out of nowhere and took blasts, you know, 1,000 blasts from all these AT-ATs and survived and faced Kylo Ren down and he never even touched them.
So the thing, too, about the kids telling the story about Luke at the end, and Luke's character being different, and some things being different from the original trilogy. It almost got me thinking that original trilogy starts out like what, in a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That feels like that's a storybook opening. It almost feels like, is that original trilogy or all of this like a story being told? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
the original trilogy, you could almost retcon it and say, well, that's not actually what happened.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of people mad. But it was that. It was held up to kind of a ideal version of these heroes and the things that happen. And they didn't always make the best decisions, but it was a hero's journey. And it almost seems like it's constructed in a way to inspire and have lessons. And this new film feels like a modern, more realistic characters and kind of rooted in heavy themes over just kind of continuation of plot and fitting everything in like a perfect little puzzle. I'm not saying one way is right or the other, but personally, like, I think this film is going to be a much richer film to revisit. Like, it's one I want to buy and rewatch a lot because there's so many layers to it, I think, to peel back, and so many ways to look at it, that I think even the original trilogy doesn't have the same sort of depth on some of the themes. I'm not saying that makes it better or worse. It's just a different type of experience. And then maybe it's not the experience some people want. But for me, it's a fascinating film. That it is a big budget sci-fi film, and all this is packed into there. And it's like, I applaud Rian Johnson, and I think he did a phenomenal job with it, even if it's not completely perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I need to rewatch it because I've only seen it once. I don't have time to see it again. Yeah. It's just some of my issues I don't see changing, because I get that there's thematic purpose to some of the things, but thematic purpose brought about by what felt like very coincidental things. Sometimes to me, and two, just a lot of times things will feel a little bit heavy-handed. The
love thing, I did not... that did not sell it for me.
When Rose kissed Finn, I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, that did not sell with me, kind of what she said and all that. I don't think that was maybe the best way to handle it, but it was almost a blunt way to do that.
And their relationship to that point really did not show her having affection for him. If anything, it was just admiration initially.
Yeah.
Because of, the legend, what he had done and things like that.
I already forgot. Did she actually die?
He pulled her in and said that they needed a medic or something. Okay. So it wasn't clear that she was...
I couldn't remember. I was trying to think back if she had died or not, because I really liked her character, but it does almost feel like her story was so strong. Like, she had a strong character arc in a single confined film. And having said that too, watching this film, I was like, man, there's a lot of puzzle pieces. There's a lot of characters, a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, they introduced...
It's almost like too packed. But I think, again, everything has a purpose and everything is telling a specific story or theme. And so I think it all is warranted. It's just a lot is going on in this movie.
There's a bit of, like, I think it's a little bit tidier. So they introduced, like, Laura Dern's character, Holdo, and a bunch of new characters, and had her give a self-sacrifice while a character like Admiral Akbar died off screen. It seems like maybe you could have compacted that a little bit and had his character be the one that did that, because you see him in battles, and then you're introducing less characters to spend time on, so you can spend more time with your core cast and see real development.
That was probably... I was thinking about, why would they take Leia out of commission so long? I don't know for sure, but I almost think also, too, thematically, if it would have been even Leia telling Poe that stuff, you would have just thought, oh, this is a Leia-Poe thing. They're just going back and forth. I almost think bringing Laura Dern in, it almost drives home the point of him basically trying to mansplain to her, and it's a different female leader in this role, kind of putting him in his place.
Well, it's the brash, masculine, hot shot.
It's the anti-Han Solo almost.
Somebody that's essentially often proven right by their braggadocious ways. Getting her comeuppance because they didn't think through the entirety of their plan. They just acted, versus she had more of a plan. It just seems to me that in that universe, knowing that he's kind of like, a quote-unquote locker room leader with all the pilots.
That's a good point,
that she would have gotten him on board and set him down. It's like, look, here's what. Get on board or get off the ship, not just kind of poo-poo him off, knowing that he has the ear of everyone.
Yeah. And two, knowing that like how many characters you normally come in and that you see, it was almost like all of a sudden they pull back a curtain, like, oh, here's this character that has existed but you've never seen, and she just comes right into place and then is gone.
Well, and two, something else is I forget where I saw, but somebody pointed out the prequels had far too much focus on politics and things of that nature, and trade embargoes and things aren't all that interesting. But this new series is almost completely devoid of detail beyond like small things you saw on the Casino Planet and Jakku about what's going on in the universe at large for people that aren't in, fighting against the First Order or them. Like, what's going on in the average life of people in this universe now? Like, is it worse than it was in the original series? Is it better? Like, there's really no sense of that yet.
Too, at the end of the film, also, I was thinking, how bad is the New Order? Like, are they actually bad rulers?
Or,
because I haven't really seen too much of that, of them being so downtrodden on people. That's one thing that I was also contemplating.
The only real super negative thing is that they kidnap children to become stormtroopers. So kind of like the child warrior thing,
which is really terrible.
Like warlords. So terrible stuff.
But they don't touch on that in this film. They don't tell you why they're bad in this film. And granted, there's films around this, but for me, I didn't really know why. I couldn't remember why.
Well, yeah, I mean, and two, I think it's basically just that the Rebel Alliance or the Republic, their idea was more that you would have independent, planets, having somewhat level autonomy and then working together towards greater goals. And the First Order of the Empire wanted to have one centralized government with an iron fist controlling everything, and that's the big conflict. The problem is you just don't really get a sense, at least in the first one, you saw Luke living on a small planet that was on the outer rims away from the Empire, where they only had a small presence, still feeling constricted by them. And
like them like monitoring the city and everything. You're like, oh, these are some bad dudes. Yeah.
So on the new movies, you really have no concept of how involved the First Order is. Or, in the Force Awakens, how widespread were they kind of like the plucky upstart that got the upper hand when they had that base and destroyed like the Senate and all that stuff? Was that the moment they really came to power? And so a lot of that stuff is not really contextually clear at this point, and I'm not sure that another movie will have enough time to really explore that.
Yeah, that was another question. I was like, are they actually that bad? Because this film, I think, is really well self-contained. Because again, I walked into this film too thinking like, okay, all the Star Wars films, they normally take place like years apart from each other. And right before they started, when the trailers, I was like, oh shit, I remember them saying this picks up exactly where the Force Awakens leaves off. I was like, I should have watched that film, because that's like one of the first ones that picks up at the same moment.
It doesn't.
I was like, oh shit, I should have watched that.
Yeah, it doesn't spend a lot of time elsewhere.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't spend a lot of time in between the movies, likely, but...
I mean, I hope people that really hate it at least like give it another chance and maybe just look at it in a different light. And if you don't, I totally get it. If it's just not for you, that's how it is. Force Awakens just wasn't for me. But me personally, it kind of re-energized me and has got me excited to see what else he does and to see. I'm really curious. I'm not like saying I'm excited thinking it's going to be stellar automatically, but I'm really curious to see what J.J. Abrams is going to do now that he's put them in this corner, because he took away his almost, the mystery box things. Like, I love that Snoke's out of there, because honestly, who cares who he is? It's a fun thing to think about, but thematically within this film, the more important thing was building that character of Kylo Ren and kind of, I don't know, you just gave him way more weight by doing that and making that strong decision.
Well, I think, too, you also have the thematic thing of Kylo Ren comes from the bloodline of Skywalkers, and not the Solos were with the Force, but you come from that Skywalker bloodline, and you have the kind of predestined fate aspect to it, and the entitled, one percenter, like, legendary family, legacy. And then you have Rey, who's this kind of nobody that can meet or exceed that. And so you have kind of the, the preordained legacy versus just, the average person.
Which is kind of great that's the story being told on this one versus the original trilogy of
But then in this movie, when they are fighting over who gets the lightsaber after Snoke's been killed and the guard's been killed and then it blows up, like, Rey just slips off the ship, and so that's something that wasn't super clear to a lot of people, because
She took Snoke's ship, right?
She took his escape pod.
Yeah.
So before she got dropped off, she told Chewbacca that they would meet up at the rendezvous point. So once all that happened, she got into Snoke's escape pod and escaped and met back up with Chewbacca and got on the Millennium Falcon, and then was able to track down Leia with that tracker thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't super clear that happened. It was explained off screen or explained in a line of dialogue what happened, but it wasn't on screen.
Yeah.
And
is that one of the deleted scenes? I know they said they have like a sequence of her in there. I don't know if it was before that fight or afterwards. I guess it would be afterwards because before that she's just taking in handcuffs.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I do know like one thing is like, so if Kylo Ren was knocked out, why didn't she do more with that? Because she could have been like, well, he's not going to turn to the good side. Might as well kill him now.
Yeah.
And end the entirety of the conflict.
Yeah.
Because it's not like she tried and failed to get him to come to her side. So
I mean, does she still going to hold out hope though? You know what I mean? Like, is she still going to do that? It's another interesting thing of how this is going to end when, I guess the Skywalkers are supposed to bring balance to the Force or whatever.
Well, I think it's supposed to be the end of the Skywalker saga and in that like family and
which who said like the Skywalkers are going to bring balance to the Force? Was that in the original trilogy?
It was in the prequel trilogy. They said that there was somebody who was fated to bring balance to the Force, and they thought it was Anakin because his mother was a virgin, and he was created by pure energy. And,
which, I mean, it could be Kylo. It could be the thing I was thinking about. It could be Kylo in that, like, because of the journey of that family, it could bring balance as far as basically getting rid of, when it brings balance. That's not
if they
meaning there's a set number of Jedis, a set number of Sith. It's people across the world or universe is the Force is democratized now. Possibly that could be it. That it's the end as we know it, which I think it could lead up to potentially really interesting stories if there are just everymen with Force. Like, not everybody's gonna have lightsabers. They're gonna be doing stuff with sticks and everything.
Rogue One did that with some of the characters. It's just like,
but yeah, they were alluding to that. I think.
Yeah, so I mean, there are interesting directions they're going in, and part of it is, I know like Empire didn't, like when it came out, there was backlash to it because it wasn't what people expected and it went in such a different direction. So it's kind of hard to know exactly how a second film fits into the overall piece without seeing the third one.
It's really crazy that it's really surprising that Star Wars didn't have a roadmap for these films. You know what I mean? That gave these directors like a guidebook.
Well, I think that George Lucas did have plans for episodes like beyond 6.
I meant Kathleen Kennedy and Disney.
Yeah,
I'm surprised that they didn't. It's very bold of them to not do that. Again, personally, I think that came out with a stronger film for this one because...
But it makes it all the more interesting. They fired Lord and Miller from the Han Solo film for having a unique vision.
Yeah. I'm really interested to see where it's going to go. It's really crazy that they handled the end of the Skywalker saga by basically letting a directors go step by step on these 3 films, and not having a plan. Like, that's almost insane to me.
I would think,
as somebody who loves to see directors with their own vision, and I think personally it worked out for this one. It's just wild that they did that.
I mean, I would think they have to have some ideas of like, well, here's what we were thinking.
Yeah.
So see what you can do with those. Like, there has to be some idea because otherwise.
Somebody had a script for this one, and I think he threw it out. I can't remember who it was.
Yeah.
But Rian Johnson essentially threw it out, he said, and rewrote the whole thing.
Yeah, so like, without knowing what the third film is, and 2, something else that this movie could do, Star Wars as a whole did this with the whole Force Ghost thing. So that was something that wasn't really able to, like, from what I remember from the prequels, it was Qui-Gon Jinn had learned about some things before he passed away, and then Obi-Wan knew it, so that's how he was able to become a Force Ghost and talk to Luke and stuff. So it's not that everybody knows how to do that. It's only a small number of people that figured it out, like Obi-Wan and Yoda, pretty much, and I guess Anakin, based on the end of Return of the Jedi. But if Luke comes back as a Force Ghost in the next one, then it really diminishes him passing away, or... Like, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense that he would just become a Force Ghost and then go and mentor and train Rey. I don't think they'll do that.
Yeah, I don't think they should either. It makes
no sense to do that versus just staying alive.
Because I don't think she should be a almost like a typical Jedi. Like, I think it's cool if the Jedi basically end as we know it, and she may use some things she's learned, but it is kind of the end of the road as the traditional Jedi, because that seemed like almost a failed experiment, based on the way things have gone with the Jedi as a ruling class
Well, it's just you have too many people, too many structured roles, too many things in place. Like the Jedi Council essentially created Darth Vader by their treatment of Anakin. And so like all that ending makes sense, but without seeing like the next movie, like I am interested to see where they go because I'm not sure what like they have interesting plot threads to take, but there's only one more movie in this series with these characters. There's a lot left loose without a clear path as to what's going to happen.
I saw an image or a tweet, and it said it was the Star Wars crawl, and the tweet said JJ be like, Star Wars Episode 9. It was all a dream.
Yeah, it's all a dream. The Snoke and Kylo Ren began work on Starkiller Base 2.
So again, Kylo is, I guess, probably just gonna die. Unless they have a love child or something.
He's
crazy.
like male entitlement, with like a legacy behind him and like all that stuff embodied. And
I hope it piggybacks off of the things introduced in this film as far as thematic things where, again, democratization of the Force, it is the people rising up, not this little band of resistance, because you're not going to get anywhere with that.
The Force really hasn't been democratized in any way that it wasn't before because there is no central body telling people how to use it.
Yeah, I think
just the movies themselves are showing you more people that have sensitivity to it. And two, I'm really glad... Somebody was talking about how like Kylo Ren got way more powerful between like the first movie and the second one. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, maybe he was taking like a cortisone shot that was full of midichlorians. So like the cortisone shots are things like the athletes take to like make joints not hurt and make injuries, whatever. So he's just like shooting up before any big battle or something, the superpower. But I mean, like I had a number of issues with the movie, but I mean, it was a interesting film.
I had not stopped thinking about it because it has so many things to think about.
See, to me though, that like the things I've been thinking are more of like, well, here's the things I have issues with, and the things I wish were different.
Yeah.
And like one of the guys I work with, just like he's seen it twice already. He was going on about like all these points he hated that were like plot points. So I think the movie was more experiential and thematic than it was consistent story beats.
Yeah, if it depends on how you want to go about it. And I'm somebody who's more fine, like, kind of zigging and zagging on some of the plot points if the themes of them are strong enough and I'm buying what they're selling. You know what I mean? Like I may recognize it, but sometimes I'm kind of overlooking. And it is kind of a tipping point in this film whether or not you're on board with even some of the humor, you know what I mean? Or some of the themes. Like,
I mean, and two, like, to me, Blade Runner 2049 is a movie where they brought back Deckard, who's a character that you haven't seen in a long time. So, similar to, since it was Harrison Ford, he was also Han Solo and he came back. Han Solo felt like logically where that character would end up based on what happened. When he showed back up, it felt like, okay, what he's doing now makes sense based on what we've seen before. And then what we know of what's happened. And
which kind of felt a little uninteresting to me, though. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't a lot to explore with it because there wasn't anything unexpected or, you know what I mean? Personally.
Yeah, but then like, because like Blade Runner was one where they, you brought in a character after a long absence and then they didn't really play a huge proactive role in the narrative. They were...
And be careful not to spoil too much of that film for people who haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's just like... I don't think it's a huge spoiler that like Harrison Ford's like in the movie's runtime, he's not 90% of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, the film is about finding him, kind of. Some of the film.
So like this one, you started off with Luke, and you got to spend a little bit of time with him, and then too like the Yoda stuff. I'm glad Yoda was a puppet, not CGI. But thematically, it makes no sense that it was Yoda, not Obi-Wan. But the reason it was Yoda, not Obi-Wan, is because Alec Guinness is dead and has passed away years ago. So obviously he's not around. And Luke had never met... He met Obi-Wan when he was older, not when he was younger. So Ewan McGregor showing up would be very disorienting and wouldn't make any sense. Although... Anakin showing up in the remaster version of Return of the Jedi as Hayden Christensen, and not
Yoda basically gave him most of his 99% of his training. You know what I mean? Obi-Wan really like, hey, put on this blindfold and go back and forth.
The training he got between both of them wasn't much.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense for Yoda too, and I love their interplay between each other. I thought that was like stellar. There's a whole lot to this film. There's a lot of great articles and kind of
there's a lot of think pieces.
Yes, and I really appreciate those because even if sometimes maybe it isn't always specifically the director's intent, I think this film is rich enough and the director's vision warrants that because you can tell he was very specific about a lot of things in this film. And I'm guessing the things they cut out were maybe good action beats and in certain moments that maybe weren't important on a thematic level, because it does feel like every scene in this has a specific reason and goal.
So other quick things to wrap this up, the porgs. The porgs were everywhere in the marketing before the movie came out. Because even avoiding the trailers, I was aware of porgs because I saw images of them everywhere. They weren't Ewoks. They were not Jar Jar Binks. They were just cute, interesting animals that were in it a very small amount.
Yeah,
that I was fine with. And
Chewbacca really didn't do much in this movie.
Chewbacca is apparently an amazing pilot of the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, yeah. What's the deal? What's the deal?
Why wasn't he flying it the entire time? So yeah, Chewbacca, 3PO, R2D2 don't really do anything.
Which I really don't care because there was no place for them in this story, you know?
Well, basically they've said
Chewbacca's never had a good story arc inside of the movies, you know?
Yeah, aside from the part where he's an absentee parent in the holiday special.
Yeah.
But and now that Han's dead, you would think like he might just go home, but yeah, I mean,
that's right, because he's a slave, right? Basically,
well, no,
he rescued him.
Yeah, Han Solo rescued him. So then Chewbacca then owed him a life debt, and that's why he stayed with Chewbacca stayed with Han Solo. And
he's
now
like, I can't quit the job, man.
But he still has a family and stuff, according to the holiday special, if that's still canonical. But yeah, so a lot of stuff going in that movie. I think time will take a little. I think some of this needs time to digest and to see how it sits. Because a lot of movies, like the original Blade Runner, The Thing, a lot of stuff wasn't appreciated when it came out, and it's more in retrospect that the opinions of it change. So this is a movie I do want to come back to like relatively soon, and then have a little bit of time and come back to it, and especially once the next movie comes out to see what the journey is. Because second films can be made or broken by what follows them. Because sometimes they set things up that never get addressed, and then the other films retroactively make them worse. Or they set things up perfectly, which is much more rare for a third film that is the best. That's really rare that the third...
I'm glad he forced JJ in the corner to get rid of those mystery box questions and basically answered who the parents were.
He's like, doesn't matter.
And didn't make it contrived.
Who's Snoke?
And got rid of... Yeah, because it didn't matter for this story. It was a fun little mystery thing, but thematically... Like, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, it just would have been another cool fan servicey thing if it would have been reincarnated Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, I mean, there are questions in like where did Snoke come from in the wake of Vader and the Emperor and Palpatine? Yeah, what was he doing during that time?
And there probably are answers. And I think I read about him saying like Darth Plagueis or whatever.
Yeah, Darth Plagueis was like somebody that Palpatine talked about being able to cheat death itself.
And him or somebody said, look, we could have had him stop and explain to Rey that he was Darth Plagueis, and like, I'm not saying he was, but we could. But they were like, really, she would have been like, who the hell was that? Like, it didn't matter for the story, which I applaud them for. It's not, they're not sitting there and like just thinking, like, okay, what will be cool to explain? It really is just kind of like, what do we want to say with this film? Here's what I want to say. We address stuff about Star Wars. We address stuff about, kind of the modern society. Of films in general, you know what I mean? The franchise in general, like there's a lot of things they kind of discuss within this film and kind of make points about. And that's why I think it's like very rich, will be rich on rewatches. And I'm excited to check this out again. I did not expect this to be this type of film. I thought it might be really good and have some really good action sequences and suspense scenes maybe. And it will be a really well-made sci-fi Star Wars film. I did not expect it to be this type of film.
Well, the big thing that we'll have to wait and see is how the third film turns out, because historically, the third film, even like Return of the Jedi, was a perfectly serviceable film. It was a bit of a letdown after what Empire set up with like the Ewoks and stuff like that. I can't think of, you could say Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That is a lot of people's favorite movie out of that series. I don't think it's the best movie.
You got Logan, man.
But then you got
technically that's a trilogy.
That's true, but it's really a trilogy in the same character being in the films only. But for the most part, the third films usually aren't the strongest. I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking of, but or Friday the 13th Part 3D.
I cannot wait to see what he does with this now.
But JJ probably didn't expect for the story he picks up to be where it's at. But thank goodness it's not going to be Colin Trevorrow that's taking the reins.
They said basically they was getting some pushback on him, right, about the story or where things were going. I wonder if he just basically wanted to retcon some of Rian Johnson's stuff, or you know what I mean, or basically say, hey, Adam Driver was being unreliable and telling her that her parents were nobody, just trying to turn her. Like, I wonder if there were some things where Colin Trevorrow was wanting to do, and they were like, no, we're not going to undermine the events of this film for the sake of...
Well, and two, there are some things, like, why show, a flashback of Rey as her parents leave when she's a child, if there's no importance to her parents. Maybe it's just, the emotional moment, and that's what drove her to... But... yeah, we have to see where they go.
And JJ probably had a plan, maybe. I don't know, or maybe he didn't.
I'm sure he had an overarching here's a basic here's this story and here's where I think it goes. And then
I think Rian Johnson, I don't think he made this film hating Star Wars fans or anything. I think he liked it, so he wanted to bring a different sort of energy to it, and he basically looked at the puzzle pieces he had to play with and said, how can I make the best movie right now? And he did set up a couple things for the next one, but I think he really did a good job of just making a really well-rounded experience in this one movie, even though maybe it doesn't tick off all the boxes of expanding the universe as far as seeing different places and all that stuff. But as far as being introduced to characters and knowing their motives and them having their story, there's a lot of character arcs in this film that are complete by the end. And I really appreciated that because, there are some films some trilogies where it's just I feel like we're just going to plot point to plot point, and there's some setups and a couple payoffs, but really it's just, we're just seeing them complete a goal and maybe one character changes. Maybe the main character changes by the end. This at least felt like there was a reason for telling this story, even if it maybe wasn't didn't line up with, a perfect vision of some people's Star Wars sequel to The Force Awakens.
Yeah, but I guess we can wrap up our discussion. So, a lot to say and think about the Last Jedi.
Let us know what you think in the comments. Yeah. And if you just say it sucks, tell us why. I like the discussion more than just saying you're stupid because you don't like it, or you're stupid because you do like it.
I did see on Twitter there was I was looking at the I was going to tweet about it. I was hashtag The Last Jedi, and then some of the autofill corrections were The Last Jedi is awful, The Last Jedi is terrible, and there was a few thousand tweets of that already. And I think a lot of times people just make really reductive comments oh, it wasn't what I wanted, so it sucked. There's there are a lot of, even people who really like it have some issues with it. Floating space Leia, but this is gonna be I think it's a controversial movie, and it will be. The interesting idea or the interesting thing to see is, what does the perception of this do to the third film? Do they change course any? Does it increase or decrease anticipation for the third film? Well, the third film, because the box office for this one wasn't as the opening weekend wasn't as high as the Force Awakens, but the Force Awakens had 30 years of build up seeing these characters back, so it had heat on it that you wouldn't see typically. In the sequels, sometimes if you have a huge breakout smash, the sequel will be close to the original one's gross, but a little bit below it.
And to be fair, there's already been another film in between these two. And if there would have been Rogue One, I think this would have been a little bit higher.
So we're seeing a lot of Star Wars.
I was explaining to a friend was talking to me on the phone about something else, and she was like, "Oh yeah, and this is the last one, right?" And I was having to explain to her because she's like, "Do you like Star Wars?" And and I was like, "Okay, well the one came out last year, takes place at a different time. This is the second one of a middle trilogy. So, it's way too confusing for a basic moviegoer, which most everybody knows the deal with Star Wars, but still, she was going to go see it with her husband." And she was confused about. She thought it was the last one. You know what I mean? I'm like, no, they're not going to stop making these movies.
It does say The Last Jedi.
That's probably why she thought that then.
But so a lot of these movies get very convoluted timeline wise. And two, there's times you live in a bubble of somebody that grew up on stuff, And I did see a lot of comments from people that I think are kind of wrong-headed generalizations, like, oh, well, this is for people who've been born in the past 30 years. It's not for, the old Star Wars fans. This is for new fans. And it's like, well, no, I don't think that's what it is.
It's a different film, but
I think saying
it's hard to
like,
make those same films again and them be important still.
Saying this is for the new fans, not the old fans, that's when they literally reboot a property in a different format for something completely different. I'm blanking on examples of that now, but there are times that they reboot a franchise with the intention not being to keep the old fans, but to introduce this IP to new fans. And that is what happens sometimes with this. I don't really think it's that, because if somebody didn't care about the originals, then why would they be watching this movie? I mean, because The Force Awakens really relied upon you knowing the universe for it to be effective. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean,
I'm sure there's plenty of kids, though, that have only seen The Force Awakens and Rogue One. There is.
Because they're like, oh, I don't like these old movies.
Or they just, their parents just never showed them to them. You know what I mean? There has to be legions of them.
I'm sure there are a lot of people that have done things that are wrong in their life, like watch part 7 of a series.
I mean, I have people go see Return of the King with me that hadn't seen the first 2 in high school. You know what I mean? Like, people just go to the movie, especially when it's big events like this. But and that's why I like this one, because it was so satisfying on its own. The Force Awakens, it had these great fan moments, and it did set up some cool things, and I wasn't on the video review when you guys had it before. Yeah. But honestly, I wasn't dying to, because I didn't like it. I didn't really have any good reason to bash. Like, I wasn't didn't want to bash the film or anything. Like, there's no reason to do that. If you don't like it, you can just step away from it.
I think too, the big difference, I guess we'll wrap this up after this, is The Force Awakens, the worst thing, or not the worst, but most people came away at worst being kind of apathetic, oh, it kind of covered a lot of the same ground. So I wasn't a huge fan of it. That seems to be there are people who flamboyantly hated it and spewed their hatred everywhere, but that was the general opinion on the low end, and the high end's I loved it. This movie, there's people who love it and people who hate it. I fall more on the dislike than like, but I need to watch it again. But this seems to be much more controversial and much more of a, sparking all kinds of debates on Facebook and social media. And two, I think social media in and of itself causes problems for things like this, because if these platforms to argue existed, I'm sure these exact same types of conversations would have occurred over, Empire Strikes Back or other franchise films over the years. Just that didn't exist then. So it's mostly just people talking to each other in person, or writing letters to the editor of comic books or, fan magazines. So there wasn't the same outlet for all this stuff. So controversy creates controversy.
And it's great to be able to hear people's opinions and analysis and likes and dislikes. If there's a lot of good breakdowns, I've read a couple negative reviews that are well written. You know what I mean? That I think, okay, I see if that wasn't gelling for you. A lot of the points where I'm I didn't really have too much of an issue with that, just a personal preference. I've seen some great analysis and breakdowns on some of the themes. I've only seen 2 or 3 of those that I've actually read, just because I was kind of going into this a little fresh, basically just on my own opinions. But I did read a few of those. If you have any great kind of breakdowns of the film and what doesn't work, if you're not a fan of it, send those in too, because I want to read some well-written pieces that are on the negative side as well, which I found a couple. But too, even if a film has strong themes, it doesn't mean that somebody's necessarily going to like it.
Well, even things that are universally loved, a lot of times you can, Batman, the Dark Knight, you can find breakdowns of plot points in that don't make sense. Spoiler alert for Dark Knight, the Joker and his henchmen break into a party and throw Rachel Dawes out a window, and Batman saves her, and then they just casually stroll away, while Batman's down in the car and incapacitated. So there's any movie you can find things to pick at. It just seems like Star Wars is something where a lot of people who don't like Star Wars like to tell you they don't like it, and make it a point to the day of the new movie coming out saying I don't get why everybody likes this. I hate Star Wars. I'm not going to see it. And it's the same people who, if they don't like sports, if they don't like a TV show, if they don't like a book series, they want to shit on other people's experiences and time. And that's somebody who goes online and reads a Wikipedia summary to see what happened and then spoil it.
Yeah.
So that stuff's terrible. Even if you hate a series, you have no reason to try to get, to lessen someone else's enjoyment of it. That's terrible. But if you actually have, good commentary or, discussion about it, let us know. In the comments, if there's anything that you think is super relevant that we missed or totally forgot or misinterpreted 100%, let us know, because people do that from time to time.
Yeah, and we've only seen it once as well too. So we could have totally missed some things or misexplained some things, and we probably have, and as far as the lore goes, probably got some stuff wrong. But on the film as a whole, I absolutely loved it. I'm dying to see it again. I did not. This is probably going to make my top 10 of the year, like overall. I did not expect that at all because, those last two were fine experiences in film, but I didn't feel like they had enough meat to them to even rewatch really. So I did not expect this to have actual meat to it in this way. And I think it's great filmmaking, if sometimes a little messy. I know they cut like 25, 30 minutes out of it. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast on something this big, that things got a little messy. Maybe at some points because there's so many characters, so many things going on. So it's not like, this isn't a Kubrickian masterpiece where everything feels like perfectly constructed moment by moment. But I think he has damn laser focus on the points they're making with this, and specifically did a lot of things for specific reasons. And that's why I'm on board with it, because at least it's a singular vision, and I just love the way it was handled.
Yeah, it's an audacious film, even if it didn't connect with me in a way that evoked the feelings of the old ones. But yes, I guess I can wrap up our discussion of Star Wars: The Last Jedi. So, like I said, if you want to hear us discuss other movies, mostly older horror films or cult films,
or genre films,
podcast.
we do action films.
Yeah, we do.
Stuff.
Yeah, we did
Modern
like Lethal Weapon
stuff.
recently.
Yeah.
So we do like older stuff or genre stuff. So check out our podcast. We also do short films and things like that. So if you're, you can check out our other videos. But that'll wrap up our discussion of The Last Jedi. Thanks for watching.